Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Early Lessons from Districts Using High-Quality Materials About Making the Shift to Remote Learning. I'm Kay from Amplify, and I think we have a really great panel today of folks who are focused on getting high-quality materials into the hands of students and teachers. We had originally planned to focus on lessons about making that shift over to high quality materials, but given the current circumstances, we're also going to be focusing on how to make that shift in this period of remote learning and what it looks like to use high quality materials during this particular time we're in. So I think it's going to be a great discussion, and we're really excited to have you all on the webinar today. A couple of housekeeping items. One, you are all muted, so you can communicate with us if you'd like through the chat function about any technical questions, or you can introduce yourselves. And then we would love to answer your questions at the end of the session. We'll be collecting what you ask and trying to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Please put those into the Q&A bar that's at the bottom of your screen. The chat is also there. But the Q&A is really where we'd love you to put your questions. And again, we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the time together. So with all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to Larry Berger, who is the CEO at Amplify and who will be our moderator for today's online panel.
Hello, everyone. Really delighted to be talking, and I think we have a really important topic, quite an urgent one for a lot of folks, and I'm really looking forward to talking to some national experts at every level of the system who are working on this and who are learning as we go. I think had we done this session 2 months ago, we would have been talking to experts who could have said, I've done this and here's what works, and they will share some of that. Now, like everyone, they are thrown into context where they can say, I've done certain things that worked in the way schools were before, or worked pretty well in the way schools were before. But now a lot of things have changed and we are in a new world, and it's experimentation everywhere. But even that experimentation, like all good science, is guided by principles and by ideas about what are the bedrocks of good instruction and good educational leadership and good relationships with kids. And so I have been thrilled in preparation for this, talking to these three about what they're doing, how they're thinking about it, but most importantly, what they're learning. And I hope in this conversation, folks will share the things they do that they think are the right response to this moment, the questions they have that I think everyone has about this moment, and how best to support education during it, and also some of the things that aren't working, that are difficult to do at this moment. Our topic is high quality instructional materials in the context of this crisis. And it's worth just saying, for those who are new to the topic, that this movement around high quality instructional materials is in some ways as old as education itself. People have always tried to figure out what are the right ways to get great high quality materials in front of kids to learn with, but in other ways is quite a product of the last decade. And some of where it came from was a way in which educational improvement cycles. So there was a period of, well, maybe if we fix the schools and the way that they're led, then schools will get better. Or maybe if we have an accountability system and more testing, schools will get better. And maybe if we reward teachers with performance pay, outcomes will get better. And around a decade ago, people started saying, we look at all these things, and at the end of the day, what happens in classrooms between teachers and kids, what the actual activity is, what the curriculum is, how it's structured, how it's put together, seems like it might be a pretty big factor here. And we need to look at that as a locus of having a real impact on student achievement. And so this effort to get high quality standards, to build curricula that express those standards, and to try to tighten the loop between the way we teach, the way we measure, and the expectations we have for what kids should be able to do in the future. And so out of that have grown a bunch of national movements and a bunch of work being done locally and at state levels to try to make it more possible to have more classrooms succeeding with materials that, in the judgment of expert and scientific opinions, are high quality. And some of the leaders in that are with us today. I'm delighted to introduce Kate Gerson, who is now a consultant, but working with lots of organizations on these issues. But over the course of her career, she's done teacher, principal, state education department, and founding CEO of a nonprofit startup organization called Unbounded. And she is, at this point, she remains a senior fellow for Engage New York, which was, as many of you know, one of the beacons of this high quality instructional movement. And for a lot of people, using materials from Engage New York was their first taste of doing HQIM, and still is to this day. Allison Grandberry is the P5 science specialist in the Department of STEM in Chicago Public Schools. And Chicago Public Schools is doing some of the most ambitious work around curriculum, equity, supports for teachers, and now increasingly supports for families in this era of COVID-19 and learning from home. And then Kendall McNutt is the Director of Student Learning at Yelm Community Schools. So she has really deep experience in classrooms, in buildings, in making a district, not a large district, but a district that is large enough to have all the issues and complexities that are reflective of American education. She has worked on how to implement a high quality curriculum and how to build support for it and how to move it into daily practice of teachers. All of the worlds of Kate, Allison, Kendall got quite blown up by COVID-19, and they have been thinking and reinventing what education is, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Kate, let's start with the sort of pre-crisis version of what is involved with the transition to high quality materials. You've been the state leader encouraging this. You've been the trainer helping individual teachers do this. What are some of the things that it takes to get a district into the realm of high quality instructional materials?
Well, it's a change process, right? It's a transformation from a comfortable way of doing things that frankly is grounded in sort of how we've always done things, how we were trained to do things, how we've come up doing things, and a new level of rigor gets established or expected. And that rigor is grounded in a staircase of complexity across math and literacy that if we're climbing those stairs at the right time, we will arrive at a graduation stage, walking students across, ready for the lives they imagine for themselves, right? And the intensity of what it requires to offer students access to that staircase was new, right? It was different. And it called a lot of our own pride and experience and sort of identity into question, because suddenly folks who've just gotten out of a teaching prep program or have been teaching for 25 years are being told, we have to learn how to do this a new way. And so, you know, that process is not unemotional. It is, it calls a lot of our own sense of what we can even handle into question, because a lot of it requires us learning our content better, right? So like we have to learn conceptual math. That's not how we learned math. So we have to come to understand more than the tricks that American schools taught us in terms of how to get through mathematics. And we have to engage with the texts we're offering at a far deeper level and ask students to handle much more complexity than we used to. There's also a ton of fairly loaded changes around early literacy stuff, where we had like, it was phonics, it was whole language, it was balanced literacy. It was like, you know, just hold them and love them and read to them and everything will work out fine. But we have a body of research and a body of science that's asking us to really integrate that love of reading and some really comprehensive phonics work. So there's a shift that calls a lot of our comfort and a lot of our confidence into questions. That transformation has not been an easy one. And so any district taking it on is doing so with courage and ultimately a lot of grace, because it requires not being as good at our jobs as we were before we started, and then needing to get better again.
Now, Kate, can I make you tell a story, which is, you use the word rigor twice. It is one of the more common words that you use. I think I got a text from you recently. This came up in a conversation with your mom, who was herself a teacher, and she was correcting your word choice, I believe.
Well, what happened was 2 nights ago, we've been talking every day now, you know, like I need to tell her what Cuomo has said and catch her up on the state of things and remind her this is happening. And so the other day, she's like, what are you up to? And I was like, oh, I'm doing a webinar on rigor in the time of the pandemic next week, or in a couple of days. And she said, 24 hours later, she said, you know, we didn't know what that word meant. And we both thought, my stepfather was a K-12 music teacher, so they both have long careers in education. And they were like, our only association with the word was rigor mortis. And so we looked it up, and it turns out it's like a change that's been happening for like a decade. And I was like, yeah, Mom, that's what I've been doing for a decade. You know?
Yes, and you probably have as much impact as anyone on why that word is at the center. So I love that that Mom learned some vocabulary from her daughter. So it's already a change that requires grace, and then you tell people kids are going home, there aren't going to be classrooms, you got to do this kind of work online and in packets. What are you seeing about what people are going through now, and what things would you advise about the added burden of doing this in a time of social distancing?
It adds so many things. You know, what I've seen a lot of districts and organizations do to make this transition, obviously, is the first phase was really grounded in connection, communication, compassion, like where is everybody, what's going on, who needs the device, right? Like really dealing with like, how do we set this up? The first week or two has really been spaghetti at a wall. And really trying, or it's not 2 weeks anymore, but the initial phase was really spaghetti at a wall and just get it going, get something happening, get something up. And the value of that, which I just see universally, is educators knowing that they are, the way I say it is the shadow front line, right? Like educators are not throwing their bodies between the children and the pandemic, but they really are the next phase of how to hold this society together. Not folks who are out there working in grocery stores or hospitals, but holding everything together for students, because we provide so much structure. We provide a sense of order. We provide substantive things to do with children for their mind, right? For their mind to get through a day. So all of that feels fairly consistent no matter who I'm talking to. When I talk to folks who had established aligned curricula already, the way I'm hearing it is it has been an easier transition, because you have a spine to the day. You have someone on your team was just calling it a North Star. Like you have a sense of what would be ideal if we could pull it off this week, and therefore sort of everything else can kind of be adjusted by that scope and sequence, because that scope and sequence is something we can rely on as being coherent. But folks are needing to get creative. I've heard all kinds of obviously a ton of Audible is being used a lot of, probably one of the nicest things I've heard is folks who have kids doing work together, which helps replace that social loss for kids. And like, here's an assignment, find somebody, call me back in an hour. I've heard of teachers doing read alouds or doing work in a text with kids. And instead of just getting it out there, telling the kids to push play and kind of hope for the best, they're saying pause. They're saying pause the video here, go think about this, go write for a while, come back, put the video back on. What else did I want to tell you guys about? One of the coolest things I've seen is a high school in Brooklyn, or it's a community-based, charter management organization in Brooklyn, is taking on the fact that New York State canceled the Regents exams, right? And so all of a sudden, the thing that all high school students in New York are focused on and like show up studying for and like really kind of ramp up about, they've replaced that moment, that marker, with performance-based assessments or portfolio assessments, and created that sense of not high stakes, because nobody needs more stress right now, but a sense of responsibility and accountability that students are working with their teachers. And, they sort of worked out a ratio where kids have a teacher they can use as support for this, and really driving towards a serious presentation about the work that would have been found in that Regents exam prep. So, folks are getting creative. The one thing I'd like to sort of flag is when we talk about children who are living through this in a way that it is providing new trauma or it's enhancing traumas that were already happening due to domestic violence, substance abuse, homelessness, what have you, we have to be very careful. And I see many folks working hard as a community, really talking about this and trying to be careful, but we have to be careful not to do sort of a COVID version of what has been a default in the past of saying, this child's life is too complicated, or the challenges that this child is facing make it impossible for him to think or to think at these levels. Time is squished, right? We have to get creative about, do we offer a class when mom is home so mom can provide the structure or the device for that to happen, right? So there's a lot of flexibility folks are needing to have. But I do want to sort of name the fact that a lot of the worry we have about our students, particularly, we're 600 square feet. A lot of the worries that we have about our students and about overtaxing them or providing toxic struggle when they're living with other challenges as it is, we have to be really careful to track the role that biased expectations might play in that for students living in poverty, and particularly for students of color. We have to really track and say, am I saying this because of a student's actual availability and capacity? Or would it be possible and impactful and a positive influence to provide a space for this kind of thinking? So just tracking our own love, our own willingness to protect and kind of shield our students when what they might really need is the structure and high expectations of opportunities to do some substantive work.
I think that's so important. And, this is always a theme in your work, Kate. What do you say to people about standards-based instruction in this moment? Like, do you say that way in which the standards were driving and a certain rate of progress through them, instruction before COVID, that after that first phase you mentioned, that's about connection, we got to get right back there? Or is it a different time with different expectations?
Well, the now is still spaghetti-ish, right? We're still just sort of trying to figure out how to pull this off until school is over. So
Yeah.
we should think about it in phases, right? We should think about like how to really get through providing as much rigor, structure, and support as we can right now. And then notice that we've got a minute to plan for the fall and to think about the opportunities found in this. Like, we have a body of research and materials that at this point have to be leveraged, right? Like, there's no room anymore for maybe not doing standards-based instruction. Our students, yes, we're going to have slippage because of COVID, but it's really not going to be, our students are going to be 3 months, probably farther behind than they would have been. But the same solutions are going to be necessary there. Grade level standards are still what is just, right? And when this whole thing's finally over, they're all going to be 18 months older or 2 years older, right? And so they need to be ready for what they're doing that year, so that at the end of their journey, they are ready for college, ready for the life they imagine for themselves. And our responsibility to provide the support using the research we have, using the materials we have, using the data we have to sort out. It's hard, it's confusing, it's overwhelming. I'm exhausted. I'm doing 7 things at the same time today, right? But to be strategic about our use of that time in the fall and beyond, so that our orientation still is grounded in an idea, a goal of readiness, no matter who you are, no matter what you've lived through. And that's really going to still need to be the goal.
Yeah, the North Star. Well, Allison, you have been doing this kind of work in the specific context of STEM in Chicago. And before COVID hit, you were engaged in what is already a big lift: how to bring the next generation science standards to a major urban district where there'd always been a focus on trying to do good science, but the next generation science standards were new. Say a little bit about what that experience was.
So that experience in a district this size, as you can imagine, was quite challenging, but quite fulfilling all at the same time. So when I think about the initial stages, when I was not in this position, I was still in the classroom. We initially had a 3-day vetting process where we vetted probably 15 or more curricula, K-8, with teachers, district leaders, network leaders, and Achieve at our side to decide which curricula we would then choose for our new high quality instructional material. It had been 15 years since we had initially adopted FOSS, STC, and CPUP was our middle school curriculum at the time. So what really surprised me / really made me happy was seeing what that rollout looks like and getting people to let go of the previously high quality instructional material, right? So we were able to see what that looks like when you do roll out something that is high quality, how teachers hold on to it. But then at the same time, I'm like, let go, guys. We're ready to move on here. We're moving from our inquiry-based era of science into our phenomena and problem-based. Come with me. Trust us again. We chose what you have loved and hung on to for so many years. Trust us. We're moving us into the next era of science teaching and learning here in the district. And boy, oh boy, I felt like I was prying hands off of those FOSS and STC kids along the way. But it also, as I said, gave me a lot of hope and to see just what does this look like when you roll out something in a comprehensive way and teachers begin to love it. And it's the best product for not only the teachers, but for our students as well.
And so you're in the process of rolling it out. Still early in Chicago, and then COVID-19 hits. Talk to us about how you reacted to that and what the experience is today.
So I'll speak from that experience with mostly the science lens in mind.
Mhm.
So we went, we had the initial period where we thought perhaps we would be back into the school. So our initial guidance was to review standards, not to introduce anything new, do review standards, maybe do more like a transfer task and think about it like that. Just go deeper with the students with activities that they have already, with standards that they've already had exposure to, right? So
Mhm.
we began in that vein.
Yeah.
Amplify Science, our partners, were right with us. They came out with their own remote learning website, along with the products that they pulled down from their own curricula that were able to be translated remotely,
Yeah.
with the most fidelity and in the easiest fashion for our teachers. They began to roll those out. With those rollouts came office hours, where they were teaching teachers everything they needed to know: how to set up the Google Classroom, how to create assignments for your students, just very comprehensive. Alongside Amplify, the Department of STEM, we also had our own science hours where we would have like a 2 or 3 hour window, several days a week, 3 days a week, where teachers could dial in with any questions that they had regarding remote learning. So we're now in the phase of planning our first Amplify unit specific remote learning, professional learning. So that should be interesting, because remember, it is, as you said earlier, Larry, it is pretty early in our rollout, and professional learning is still a very intricate part of where we are right now in this rollout phase. So Jess was on a call earlier today looking into what might that professional learning look like. We're doing a lot of needs assessment surveys, finding out what is it that teachers do need to help them in this remote learning world. So definitely we have all of the remote learning, but then we have to think about what Kate said earlier. We have students that just don't have access to tech or have alternative living situations where they're in shelters, and just thinking about the myriad of things that could prevent a student from working remotely. We've also, in conjunction with that, begun to make what we call project packets. And in the project packets, they have all 4 core subject areas where students are allowed to pick these packets up on an every 2-week basis at the sites where we're providing healthy lunch and breakfast choices for them as well. So we've tried to do it all.
Yeah, no, it seems like you are trying to do it all. And how are you handling the balance of classrooms where it's about packets and the assumption that we aren't going to be able to get kids online versus the places where kids are expecting stuff to be online? And I'm sure in the same classroom you have families in both conditions. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Larry. So as you said earlier, Larry, our district is very large. Our district is broken into 13 elementary networks. So the networks may support from 15 to some networks support 20 schools. So we see the gamut across our networks. We see students are using both the project packets with the teacher's assistance. We see where students are completely off the grid. I talked to a couple of teachers and they've only been in contact with 4 of their students. So just making sure that the touch point with them is that they're safe, that they're well, all of those components are also very important for us here in CPS to make sure that we are keeping track of our students and that they're healthy and living in conditions that are, as optimal as we can look for at this time. So, yeah, we are seeing teachers grabbing kits out of their classrooms and literally doing live demonstrations with their students as they are conducting their virtual science lessons. We're seeing teachers like literally turning their whole kitchens into classrooms. Her whole wallpaper, she like literally took pictures off the wall. And she has all of her teaching posters littered across her family kitchen. So our teachers are stepping up and showing out in Chicago public schools for our children in just a myriad of ways.
Yeah, let's take a moment here at the halfway point to celebrate the just flowering of creativity of teachers figuring out how to do stuff. I saw an amazing lesson, a teacher who was like, let's look at all the science in my bathroom. And they're like, so why does the water go this way? And then she got the camera over. Like, it's just, and then my favorite one was the teacher doing science experiments without the stuff that she needed. So it was sort of like, okay, so I'm gonna mix water and it should be baking soda, which would make it, but since I don't have any baking soda, I'm gonna put flour in, which will make paste. But you all have to imagine that instead of paste, it's starting to bubble. So you've seen trying to make lemonade, and but I actually think that one of the deepest lessons that kids are getting from this moment is they're getting to watch grown-ups work through a crisis. And I think some of what we're seeing as people work through stages, let's connect, let's do packets, let's try to get people online, is they're actually getting an object lesson in how do you cope with crisis? And I think there are some schools that said, okay, we're closing on Friday and starting on Monday, log into Zoom and we're gonna do 6 hours of teaching that just looks like the 6 hours we used to do before. Of course, that would be affluent suburban schools that have that kind of connectivity. And I think somewhere along the line, they may have missed the chance to teach a lesson about how to cope with change, how to cope with crisis, that there's a moment where you do step back, where you might lower your expectations momentarily, where you experiment a bit, and then you start building up to maybe even a better way of working than before the crisis came. And that's a deep lesson. And I think from everything I've heard about what you've done in Chicago, you've been building and figuring it out and sorting it out and connecting dots between the basics of delivering food and delivering science instruction.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't just say that we have also given devices, thousands of devices to our students that were without. I just saw that in our chat room. Someone from New Zealand mentioned that. And yeah, that is definitely something that we're doing here in CPS as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing where people have been figuring out different ways, what devices for which kids, how to get them to the kids, how to give families the support in how to do this. So I am eager to talk to Kendall a bit now, and then we'll open up the conversation for everyone to participate. Kendall, you have been doing this at the scale of a district where you actually can, in normal times, visit all the schools yourself, but not now. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about the journey that you took. Well, first of all, tell listeners a little bit about what Yelm, like where Yelm is and what kind of a district it is. And then let's dig into how you have been leading a transition to Yelm.
I think for scale, when first I met Allison and she said they had 400 elementary schools, I thought, like, we don't have 400 teachers, let alone 400 of any particular kind of school. We're a pretty small district. We about 5,600 or so students, and we're in kind of a we're kind of far away from civilization in the sense that we're a bit of a commuter town. So connectivity varies pretty wildly. We have areas that don't even have the option of service and areas that are pretty well provided for. So we see a lot of differences in what is available to our families in what they take.
And just to illustrate that, we arranged for a brief freezing of your internet, but otherwise you seem great. So So say a little bit pre-crisis about the journey you went on in bringing quality materials to Yelm.
Sure. I'll try to freeze this time. I can't make promises, but we started really and focused on professional development from the start. So the materials in front of people. We really look to orient people to kind of what the priorities were, and from perspective, that was the text, because pretty much everything else we can alter and augment. The text itself, that's immutable. That's what we have. So we really wanted teachers looking at that through the of content and rigor and complexity, so that when they saw something that wasn't, they understood it. And so the teachers were really able to prioritize kind of the well-articulated sequence of content, the rich vocabulary, challenging, grade level appropriate text, kind of got away from the leveled reader orientation. And that really helped us off the ground pretty well. And then once we started with CKLA, we exhausted the entire PD catalog at the time for CKLA and asked them even to create us some custom sessions, just to really keep that forward momentum. And so we did a math adoption. We figured out, and I will say with great confidence, that we had the great rollout of all time. I will stand behind that. And it's because of our lessons learned from CKLA.
This is a really deep point that I think Kate has worked on in all kinds of ways, which is that like lessons learned from one journey on HQIM are very transferable to others. And okay, so you really did this. You invested in professional development, you invested in the process, invested in sort of getting people bought in. And then suddenly this happens. And especially for K-5 reading and English language arts, it's tough not to be face. So say a little bit about what happened next.
It was very timed. In the midst of something of a relaunch of CKLA, we're trying to incorporate something, all of that whole body of work into our professional development, and getting teachers really think about kind of the relationship between comprehension and text, and move away from the idea of standards, ELA standards in particular, as being, kind of these finite, discrete skills, focusing in on what we do with text. So we talk about text, we navigate text, and then this happened, and that somewhat compromised our ability to continue that, and sort of changed how our teachers are engaging with our students. It's and now you're away will have these incredible materials that now have to be translated again for a group of people who simply don't necessarily have the training to pick that up. We talk about the importance of background knowledge and vocabulary and comprehension, and we're handing people who have none of that training, wouldn't have the vocabulary, background knowledge to feel confident following those kinds of instructions. And so that's a really special challenge that we've created in that. And I think, what's close to everybody's heart is sort of the equity considerations, with some students who have complete connectivity, some who are in a middle ground like me, where they occasionally freeze and it looks like they're still talking even though their face isn't doing anything. And then that third group of people who have no connectivity at all. I think we've taken a lot of the same steps there in terms kids, in terms of we've added hotspots areas where we can. We've tried to increase connectivity and make arrangements outside that. But I think it's much the same as Allison described, just with fewer kids.
Just to further illustrate the teaching, I kept myself on mute. We're making all the Zoom mistakes. You actually told a sweet story about you've taken people on the journey of HQIM, and then one of your good experienced teachers was like, but I don't know about this Zoom. And what did you tell her to do?
Well, she's an incredible teacher, and honestly, when she told that she was struggling, I just started thinking of just elaborate PD series we could create and all the ways that we could do that. And I came up with a lot of really elaborate solutions. And then off the cuff, I just said, "Have you ever thought about just trying a Zoom happy hour? Just invite your friends, and then you can push all the buttons." And that was the thing. It was that. Everything else I said didn't matter. She thought that's it. Zoom happy. That's what we're doing. And it's this incredible teacher. I just cannot speak highly enough of how she works with kids. And to see her just completely at a loss for how to engage with her students, it was heartbreaking. And I was ready to launch Zoom PD effort of all time. Turns out that was maybe shooting the solution a little bit.
Happy hour is probably the solution to more problems during this time than we know. With that, I think we have another 17 minutes, and I'd love to open up to questions from the field. And we have those in a document here. And I am gonna give it a moment to load here and then start asking. So I work for a Title I school and am having difficulty with students being able to be involved digitally. What would you suggest for instruction for students without digital access? And another teacher wanted to know, what about when the parents have very limited technology skills? How do we help them? And also specifically, given that one of the answers already offered was the packets, what's the process for putting a packet together? What goes into a packet? And how do you think about those? So maybe, Allison, let's start with that concrete one. What sorts of things were in the packets?
So I have good news for the whoever asked the question is that the CPS packets are available on our public-facing website at cps.edu. You can find the packets that we're putting together, and as I stated earlier, they are being uploaded every 2 weeks and distributed every 2 weeks, so that we're welcome others to use those project packets. So what we're thinking of in our project packets, are we thinking about them cross-content as well? So you'll see our literacy packet may be grounded in a nonfiction text that's dealing with science, a science topic, but covering some of the some of the literacy strategies, so to speak. We're making sure that whatever we're sourcing for science is like things that could be easily done, such as taking a look out your window or walking in your neighborhood, or very easily sourced materials that may be in the home. So we are keeping with those considerations as we are providing the packets for our students. And we've had good reviews on them thus far from the few people that we've talked to about them. And they are packets that can be used independently, trying to make sure that the packets were done in a manner where students with little or no help at home could engage with the materials on their own.
Fantastic. What about that question about parents? So I think people are navigating how to get kids online and sometimes how to get new devices in the hands of kids, but those homes that don't have a device almost always go with parents who are not familiar with the technologies of remote learning. Anything that any of you has seen to bridge that gap?
So I've got two wildly different answers that I've heard from two different superintendents. One superintendent who serves a district that is 100% free and reduced lunch, or I should say 99% free and reduced lunch, gave me a very surprising response to this question, which was the grown-ups are the ones having a problem with the transition to devices. It's the children. And particularly if you go with a brand that it tends to be popular in parent phones, the babies have had that phone in their hands for a long time and know how to interface with that software. So it can be more of an obstacle in our minds in terms of how to make that transition than it is for many children. That's one example. A completely different approach that I'm seeing one district take is, number one, to tier the student. Well, first of all, I should say every principal in this district has a spreadsheet of every single child and how many are missing this week? Like how many, like, is it 6? Is it 10? Like, what is it exactly that we're talking about? Who exactly, concretely, what number are we talking about that doesn't have an advice, or mom can't help, right? Or they can't learn until mom gets home from work, right? Like, what are the variables, and like how, and who is it exactly that we're talking about? And then to tier support, which may end up with one-on-one phone calls or two-on-one or one-on-two phone calls, where no teacher has the time to do all of that. Children don't need it every day. Like, you know, children who are really in crisis or are really having learning difficulties get more of those phone calls a week than others. So you're tiering that intervention. But also, that doesn't have to be this doesn't have to be the teacher. This is an all hands on deck situation, right? This is where, if you think about the model of the silent sustained reading thing, where the whole school shuts down and we all read for 30 minutes, no matter who we are. If you think about that model of how to, particularly in younger grades, how to use all the grown-ups in the building and even volunteers in the community, like how can we have every child have somebody on the phone in that tiered necessity where someone can work through that content for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, right? So those are very different answers to the question, but obviously contexts really vary.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to someone who's works in schools in a religious community where the internet is forbidden, and they are every morning the kids get on a conference call, 30 kids on a conference call, all by phone, and they're doing their studies, but they never see a screen during any of it. So there's everything from packets to conference calls to this kind of Zoom experience. Kendall, anything that you've seen around the issue of parents or just how to handle the diversity of some have, some don't have access?
I can tell you what we've done. I would say it's similar to what Kate was describing in terms of really identifying the who and what those needs are. So we start with kind of our best option is that they can access things and interact digitally. Failing that, if we can still communicate with them through email, things like that, then that's kind of our next tier of support. Right on down to we'll be mailing some packets out, and we've had packets out to students and families who need them. So really we look at kind of how can they access, and they're matching the support. So our basic plan with deviations based on need.
Yeah, I've muted myself again. Say a bit about grading. That's one of the questions that came up. What do people think about grading during this time? We
actually just released our grading guidance just yesterday, and our state came out with some specific guidance where it was students. No Fs, essentially. It's a incomplete or a grade at high school, or for high school varying courses. And so for our district, we decided it's ABC or incomplete. That's ours. I know Seattle Public Schools kind of famously has said A or incomplete, which is a bit controversial locally. And so it's kind of all over the place in terms of what that could look like, but it's essentially no Fs, no pass fail options. And so for our K-8 or non-credit bearing courses, we're living really in a feedback only environment. So no grades. We're just going to give feedback either for elementary and the core courses of ELA and math, and for level courses, that'll be feedback by course.
Here in Illinois, our guidance for Q3 was to keep with the grades that the students previously had pre-COVID, putting in grades that can enhance grades, but not lower grades. So, you know, similar to what Kate says, we're just kind of not in a sense of wanting to penalize anyone due to this new system that we're all learning to work and live within, but giving children the opportunity to enhance their grades was the way we went third quarter. Our fourth quarter guidance, we're still waiting to hear exactly how that will look for fourth quarter.
Yeah. Kate, do you want to weigh in on that one?
I was just going to say that I live with a 15-year-old who got that news and was like, all right, school year's over. So that, you know, she's living in an affluent white household, so that's different. But, you know, so there's an equity question here, but how to navigate the messaging, how to navigate the structure. And Allison, I hear you walking that line really carefully. Especially with teenagers who, like, once that no grade thing is heard, it's like, I mean, do I really need to call in? You know, so it's just something to think about, because, you know, when I feel responsible or accountable, I'm more likely to work harder.
Yeah. So say a little bit about one of the real problem areas that I keep hearing bubbling up, which is systematic phonics instruction with young kids remotely. Would love to hear Kate and Kendall on how you do that. What's working, because that's one of the harder sort of content stuff. It's, you know, there's a more natural way to translate it, but that hearing what kids are doing that is part of systematic phonics instruction. Say a bit about how that's working or not working.
Kendall, before you answer, I want to sort of flag, the other day when we were talking about this, I was really struck by the fact that I was like, what are you doing with CKLA? And you were like, I'm focused on the slippage on phonics. Like, that's my #1 priority with K2, K3. So yeah, I would love to hear the specifics about how you're pulling that off.
I think we're trying. I don't think we'll know until the fall whether or not we pulled that off. But I think, you know, part of it is, you know, the way that we've looked at all of the materials is in the let's pare it down. What we ask our teachers they pull from, what our families pull from, so that we don't overwhelmed with choices that they're not really sure where to take it next. And then the next sort of layer to that has been to somewhat standardize and to keep them in the same content as much as possible, so that we can develop a system-wide response in the fall when we have them back. We'll know kind of everybody at least got this. And so we've really focused on the skill side of instruction, which covers more, covers that realm for primary, and keeping kind of the, you know, I would argue that the domain side is just as important. So, you know, we can encourage family discussions, and to, you know, we can do a read aloud as a question and have kids talk over those things with their families. And there are ways for us to keep kind of the thinking and challenge there that are much more accessible for families than systematic phonics instruction. I think wherever possible, we're really encouraging teachers to teach live, not overwhelmingly, maybe once a week, not required, but the teachers who do it are finding that they are getting higher engagement. Miss them, and they miss their kids, and so having that live interaction at least gives an opportunity for some of those lessons to happen in very truncated, very minimal ways. One of our strongest strategies. And, you know, anytime we do live, we have recording as well, because we expect that every kid can show up at the same time. They are competing with siblings for devices, potentially competing with parents for devices, potentially. And so we have to make those additional accommodations. But if they can be there, that's generally, I would say, our strongest strategy that we've employed.
So I'm going to say something. Anybody who's ever worked for me is going to be very shocked that I say this out loud right now, but the domain stuff, it's at this moment, video will help, right? Like if, and yes, I can't believe I'm saying it, and I may take it back and regret it within an hour, but even around here, we're watching, you know, my 10th graders studying the Cold War. I've forced them into watching at least 3 biopics about the Cold War, and it's not for nothing. You know, I mean, so the effect of having NPR on all morning is real. And so in the absence of the device and the focus and the ability to support around domain specific acceleration, learning that content, learning those words, it's not nothing to do a little bit of that in video and conversation.
Yeah. So Kate, I am going to feed a question to you that that is a sort of tough-minded question. On the other hand, I feel like you've spent a lot of your career grappling with the kind of precision that you'll see in this question about the barriers to rigor. And so the question is, how can we expect and provide rigorous instruction when the child is living in a room with 5 people, one parent's in the hospital, the other parent lost their job, and there's one cell phone to share with 3 children to, quote, go online? And there are variants of that question, but you know, those are real situations. So say a little bit more about your answer.
Yep. So I'm going to start with the spreadsheet, which is who has that, right? Really, if you look at any high poverty context where stuff is happening at the community or in the community, you always will have children. I think it's a 5 to 9% layer that are in full-blown crisis right now. And that layer, of course, is larger than it would be typically. And then you've got a big swath of kids who could be, but aren't. And with the right kind of supports and interventions, and schools still have access to making sure kids are getting the wraparound services that they need, right? Schools can still be a conduit for that. And then you've got a chunk of kids, it's a lower chunk, it's like 20, 30%, who are fairly stable, right? So knowing exactly who that is and thinking about the tiered interventions is going to be very important. But I don't want to miss an opportunity to point out that prior to this crisis, I have heard sentences like that since I was 20 and in a classroom in Indianapolis of do you have any idea what that kid lived through this weekend? Or you know what went on with her mother all summer? There's just no way. And she hasn't had breakfast all week, or you know, he was in the hot, all of the things, you know, the whole family's been displaced because of the flood, right? There are going to be challenging, horrible, painful, traumatic, capital T traumatic incidents in the lives of our children. Logistically, do we have a problem? Yeah, that's a separate question from can our students handle what we're trying to do? And I defer to my mentor, and I still say he's my boss, John King, Secretary King, who tells stories all the time about losing both of his parents in a 3-year period. And the thing that got him through was the rigor, systematic support, and just like expectation of learning and intellectual engagement that his teacher was providing. And so like that's real. And that role still stands. COVID is insane. We're living in a nightmare, and our students, we don't even understand the nightmare that so many of them are in, because it's like the tsunami is still over our head. Like we're not even in the debris yet after the thing washes back. So we don't even know. But in the meantime, let's be there as a possibility of the thing that provides that anchor for them as they live through it.
Kate, I think that's a really compelling answer and a really compelling place for us to end up. I think that Allison, Kate, Kendall, I am really grateful for the wisdom that you've imparted today, but also for the work that you guys are doing every day to keep really high quality learning happening during the crisis, and the role that you play as mentors and educators for folks in your community, but also nationally. This is, you guys are symbols of thousands of people who are out there making it work right now. And so thanks for sharing. And I'll turn it back to Kay, who will just wrap up with a little bit of background.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We tried to answer a lot of the questions. Sorry we didn't get to all of them. We will be following up with an email that will have the recording. A lot of people have asked for that, and you'll get the recording of this. And we'll also try to send some of the links that were mentioned and that kind of thing. So we will be following up afterwards. But in any case, thanks so much for joining during what I know is a super busy time for everyone. And thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all of your resources. Allison, people loved the packets, learning about the packets. And we got lots of questions for all of you and lots of engagement. So thank you for also taking the time out to help people think through this.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.